JT update?
Status quo, just day to day at this point. Obviously, we're going to err on the side of caution with all these guys with where we're at, but right now he's just day to day.
How do you think Snider came out for his first game?
Yeah, I thought he played hard. I talked to him on the ice a little bit before we started the formal practice, just checking in with him to see how he felt. He said he felt like the game was going on pretty fast around him, but that's a natural, I think, occurrence when a player hasn't played a game in a long time. That will slow down for him as the more game real situations he gets himself in, and he's got to knock off some of the rust just as far as his execution with the puck, things of that nature. The decisions, knowing what he's going to do with it before he gets it, cuts down on his execution time. But that will come, and that's what I said to him. I said, with every day that you play, with each game that you play, the game's gonna slow down for you in your mind, and you're gonna be able to execute. And that's just the process.
I don't want to make too much of what I saw out there, but you have Cooley. You've had Cooley, with Mika and JT. With no JT today, you moved him, Trocheck, and played lap with Mika. I'm wondering if that was always the plan, to kind of switch those two and get a look with them on different groupings, or it's just because JT wasn't there, you decided to kind of mix things up?
It's because JT wasn't there, and we were going to mix things up. I wouldn't read into it.
No.
I think we're just trying to create a little bit of balance, give people an opportunity to play with certain guys. Obviously we're trying to build on some of the cornerstones where chemistry has already been built. And we're trying to leverage that as best we can with, for example, JT and Mika, or with Troch and Brett. So there might be some moving parts around those guys, but we're trying to leverage the existing chemistry that history suggests that these pairs could potentially work, and then it's about finding a complementary player to surround them to help that particular line, but also create the balance that we're looking for amongst the group.
You made some roster moves today. The guys who are still here, specifically Gabe and Lava, what can you tell us about, and Berard, what they've done well to still be here?
We think they've played extremely well. We think they're deserving of being here. We're trying to give them the longest possible looks. With respect to Gabe and Lobs, these guys are young guys. I think the more they're around the NHL players and practicing at the NHL pace, I think that helps them. But I think the players that were participating in practice today, we believe were deserving through their performance. And so, these decisions aren't easy. They're difficult, and we've had some of those conversations along the way. But we're excited about where some of these young guys where their games could potentially go. We still need to make more decisions, as you know. But we think that just through performance alone, that the guys that were on the ice today were deserving.
For you as a coach, though, I guess that's a good thing, knowing that you have some tough decisions to make in this.
Yeah, it's exciting, and like I said, I think I mentioned this yesterday. I know there's a lot of talk about the opening night roster and these decisions that are made right now, and I understand that to a certain extent. But those rosters in the NHL are fluid, and so they can change in a day. They can change in 24 to 48 hours. They can change next week. It's not like if a decision is made today, it's not etched in stone. There's no finality to it, and so there's a certain process that we're all going to go through, and we have part of our responsibility is trying to put game plans together to try to help players grow and develop to their fullest potential. With young players, The question is always, what's the path that helps those players become impact players in the most expeditious fashion, And my experience has been every player is unique, and you have to have those discussions on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes it involves play in the American League. Sometimes it involves play in the National League. Most of the time, it's a combination of the two, and so we'll weigh those things out on a case-by-case basis, and we'll try to make the very best decisions for both the player themselves, but also the team.
What did you see from Offman through training camp, and why did you feel like it was best for him to start down in
So Otter and I have had a number of conversations since before training camp even started, after the Lehigh tournament, when I watched him there, and having some discussions with Chris Drury and some of our hockey operations around his game, and I was trying to become more familiar with his game, and so we've had a number of discussions around what that pathway might look like for him to carve a role on the New York Rangers. And a lot of the discussion we had, just talked about conscientious play, attention to detail, defensively, away from the puck, playing within structure, having some predictability and reliability and dependability around his game. And I think if he can add more detail around those things, and essentially that's what it boils down to. It's attention to detail in all zones on both sides of the puck, in particular on the defensive side of the puck, so that there's some reliability with respect to that. And those are some conversations that I've had with Otter here over the last little while.
Speaking of defense, how do you feel the team is going from man-to-man defense to where you are now in a zone-type defense?
I think it's a work in progress. I think it's a work in progress. Obviously, we're all creatures of habit, and so there's a process that we have to go through where we can become instinctive, and we're working through those things. We got a long way to go.
Mike, just one more, if you don't mind, on Offman. Because a lot of the things you said, I think very much, were probably messaging that went to him before, he was sent down. How much at that stage, a guy who's, going to be a third-year pro, first-round draft pick, dealt with some expectations, how much is it also managing, making sure, he's not feeling too down about it, and, how difficult, I guess, is it to have a guy like that who certainly had hopes of making the team, and now trying to keep him in the right place where he's going to go down there and do the right kind of work, and hopefully put himself in a position to come back.
Well, I think it's an important part of what we do as coaches. We care about these guys. And as I said to Otter, just because this decision was made today doesn't mean that there's finality to it, and that the opportunity no longer exists. It very much exists and will continue to exist, and we will continue to work with Otter. Grant Bertolini and I have had lengthy conversations around his game, and in some of the aspects that we're talking about, and trying to help him grow and develop in those aspects of his game. Part of it is, I think players go through an exploratory process on their own when they're young players, and figuring out, what game they need to play that sets themselves up for success, And so, when you think about it, most players that play in the NHL, in every other league that they've ever played in, they were predominantly offensively gifted players. But the reality is, when you move up the food chain, so to speak, generating offense becomes more and more difficult. And so there's an exploratory process that players go through where, they have to figure out, okay, what's my game? What does that look like? What are the core competencies that I'm going to bring to a team that's going to separate me from others? And, to build a team, you have to have different skill sets. We can't just put offensive players on our team. We have to have some guys that can check. We have to have some guys that can win faceoffs and play in our own end. Do we have to have some guys that can generate offense? Of course. But the point is that we need complementary players that can fill all these roles so that we can become the team that we're going to become. As a player, you know, there's a process that every player goes through in trying to figure out what's my competitive advantage? Where are my core competencies? If I was an offensive player in college hockey or junior hockey, maybe it's a struggle for me to be that player at this next level. Can I round my game out? Can I become a good penalty killer? Can I win faceoffs? Can I bring a certain level of conscientious play where coaches can rely on me to check and I'm in the right positions and I'll be hard to play against? Can I bring an element of physicality? There's so many different things, right, where players are going to go through that process and figure out, you know, what their respective game is that's going to set them up for success. Part of our job as coaches is to help them through that process. And that's what I was trying to do with Otter, for example. So I think Otter's going through that process right now himself, and we're trying to help him through that process and provide for him what we think is the best pathway to help him have success at the NHL level.
Last one. Ask about, from day one, you said that, you know, Mika and JT were going to play together because they both want to play together. It's a long season. Could you foresee, I don't know, splitting them up for, I don't know, tactical reasons or situationally, where you would play Mika at center on a different line to kind of break up the line and stuff? And is that something that, you know, obviously he didn't practice, JT didn't practice today, so you got a chance to look at Mika at center. Is that something that we might see at some point?
Yes. Yes. You know, I think, I know Mika can play center.
Yeah.
And he's an excellent center iceman. If we put, you know, Mika and JT and Troach up the middle, those are three pretty good center icemen, you know. The question is can we leverage maybe some of the chemistry that's been established with some of those guys? You know, as I said, I shared with you guys the logic of the rationale and why we've started where we've started, right? But having said that, you know, just like we're talking about the opening night roster, nothing's etched in stone. You know, it's, you know, we're beginning to go on a journey here as a team, and we're going to have to figure out how do we have success week to week, month to month. There's so many factors. Some of it we can predict, others you can't. So we know that Mika's capable of playing in the middle, and there is, you know, there potentially could be a scenario where we do move him in the middle, depending on whether or not our team as a whole has the ability to have success. So we know what the contingency plan is in the event that with what we're trying to do right now off the start, if for whatever reason the group doesn't have success or we get stale, or there's so many things that can come into play. As I said, some of it you might be able to predict, a lot of it you can't, and we'll just have to react to it as we go. But we know that you know, that's without a doubt an option that we have on the table. And you know, might you see that at some point along the way? Yes, you might.